Music theory with Microsoft Excel. Scale degree chords versus modal chords. This time building chords off of the minor modes, building those minor chords. We'll also throw in the Locrian chord, which is similar to a minor chord, but it's got that crazy flat 5. So get ready and some coffee, because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rockin', for which Microsoft Excel is required. People will tell you otherwise, but I'll tell you this, it is required. We are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay, because we basically built this from a blank worksheet but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just construct the part of the worksheet we're currently working on. If you do have access to this workbook, though, 4 tabs down below, including a very colorful fretboard tab, the example tab, in essence, the answer key, the practice tab, having pre-formatted cells so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you don't have any of that, that is okay, because we'll be continuing our work in the blank tab, where we started with a blank worksheet, and we'll be continuing in essence, the blank part of the worksheet, practicing not only music skills, but Excel formatting skills as well, for formatting's sake. Let's go on over to the fretboard tab to get a reminder of our overall objective. We want to be thinking about how to organize our chords in the most efficient way possible. In particular, to locate them on a fretboard on a guitar, but the same idea works for any instrument as well. We currently have a fretboard where we have the low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling on top, and we've broken out each of the frets to have 2 sides to them. One is going to be the point, that would be the note point or the modal point, and the second is going to be the distance. Now, this is useful when we're trying to build chords, because when we build chord, the most practical way to do so is to say, what collection of notes am I in? Typically listing the collection of notes based on applying the formula to the major scale or the Ionian node. In this case, we're in the 7-note collection around the C major. Then we locate which of the 7 notes that we are going to be playing off of, and then we build our chord off of it, which we can do multiple ways. We could do it by, in essence, shape, caged shaped, bar chord type of shape, but we'd also like to be able to list it out, count it out, so that we can see different variations of the chords and understand what's happening when we build more complex chords, adding the 7, the 9, the 11, and the 13, and so on. Noting the current chord construction idea forces us to, for example, if we choose a Phrygian, to build a minor chord off of it. We would just call it a minor chord, which doesn't tell me where we are on the fretboard in terms of the overall shape. And if I call it an E minor chord, it doesn't allow me to transpose the music as I move it up and back throughout the shape, which causes a problem as well. And when I build the chord, I have to name this not the Nashville number system of a 3 for the Phrygian mode, but call it the 1, so that I can then locate the 1, 3, 5 from a system of a scale degree system, which pulls me out of this entire shape. It forces me out of this shape, right? So what would be the most efficient system from a functional standpoint would be, let's name the chords off of the points that we are on, and then simply change the second side, in this case of the fretboard, so the measurement changes, so that then I can build the chord by the modal chord. So an Ionian is, in essence, the major chord, and then if I go to a Aeolian over here, the minor chord, then I can switch my perspective right here, so it's from the perspective of the Aeolian. And now you can see that this is a perfect first from the Aeolian, and we can build our chord from that perspective. You can call it a minor chord, but it's more specific to call it an Aeolian chord. Now, let me show you that in more detail, why that's a functionally useful thing to do. If I go to the example tab over here, we would like to, from a functional standpoint, list all of the 7 nodes that we're playing in, and then basically list out our chord names that are available to us that we can build off of those nodes. So in other words, you would think our chords would be grouped by the Ionian chords, the Dorian chords, the Phrygian chords, the Lydian chords. These would be the chords that have each of the 7 points as the root of the chord. But what we actually get if you look up a chord chart looks more something like this, where they're just going to say, we have major chords, we have minor chords, we have 7 chords, we've got diminished chords, we've got half diminished chords. And the question from a functional standpoint is, yeah, but when do I do a major chord versus a minor chord if I'm playing in any one of the 7 note collections? When does the 7 chord happen? When does a diminished chord happen? What is the deal with this half diminished? When do I use those in conjunction with the function of playing a song, right? So we're going to actually build this out so that you can see the table over here. We'll build it out and then we'll show you each mode and then basically the normal name, which bucket it falls into. And then we'll also show you what I think is a more efficient naming convention, naming it off of the modes, which is basically what the Nashville number people are in essence doing already. It's just that we want to get more formal with it and stop allowing people to go into the blank tab, pretend like it's a hack instead of the better way. All right, let's go to the blank tab and we're going to say this is going to be numbers 1 through 12. We've got our letters A through G sharp. We've got all of the letters and numbers. We then applied out the musical formula based off of the key of C, which is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So that gives us our notes for the key of C, our 7-note collection, remembering that the relative positions of 1 through 7 and the relative distances between all of them will be the same for all 12 collections of 7 notes. So if I find the relative distance between like the 1 and the 3 for the C major collection, Ionian to Phrygian, it'll be the same Ionian to Phrygian for an A major collection, right? A collection built off of the A. So I can use those distances even if I change the note names to calculate our intervals and whatnot. And then we've got our intervals. So this is one way we can build the chord is by interval, meaning we can name the root and then give the distance to the last note, or I can name the root and name the last point that we're going to, and then you derive the distance. So it's just like algebra here, right? We've got 3 components. We've got where we're starting and then how far we're going and then the end point. All I need to do to tell you what to do is to give you 2 of those 3 points, the starting point and the distance to the last point, or the starting point and the ending point, and then you derive the distance. All right, so we've done this for the Ionian. So if you're on the Ionian, we typically start with a triad, which you'd call a C major, but you can just call it generically a major for any of the 12 collections of 7 notes. It would be better if I can eliminate the C altogether, because then the whole thing is transposable, and it would be better if I can name it by relative position. But then you have basically a 4-note chord, which would be a C major 7, a C major 9, a C major 11, and a C major 13. So all we're doing is going from 3 notes, adding every other note in the system, whether you call them scale degrees, modal half steps, modal whole steps. You're just taking every other note as you count them up. And then we did the same thing for the Lydian, which still builds the major scale if you think about it from the Mixolydian, because it has the same relative positions, but it's not the same all the way through, because then when you add the 11, then the Lydian, the 11 being equivalent to the 4, has that 6-note away Lydian, which throws everything off. So you get these 2 that are out of whack. If you just named it by the Lydian, if you just named it a Lydian chord, then you would already know that those 2 are out of whack. You wouldn't get this funny, ugly chord. You just call it a Y5 chord, meaning it's 5 modal whole steps up to that last note, and so on. And then the Mixolydian, similarly, the triad is the same, but as soon as you add the 7, it's a minor 7. That's what's different from the majors, right? So then they had to make up this whole other thing for 7 chords to name that, we shouldn't have to do that. You should just call it a mixolydian. We already know the 7 is a different for the mixolydian chord. I'm just building a mixolydian chord which naturally has a flat 7, a 10 note away 7 instead of an 11 note away 7, or a 10 note away 6 modal half step away. Okay, so now let's do the same for the minors. Now when we do the minors, what we want to do is typically start with the Aeolian, and then the other minor modes will be most similar to the Aeolian, only having one difference between them, that being the Dorian and the Phrygian, so that if I know the Aeolian intervals, then and therefore the Aeolian chord construction, I can also then easily derive Dorian and the Phrygian, because those are the other minor chords, meaning if you think about it from the 1, 4, 5 are major, 2, 3, and 6 are the minors. The 6 is the main minor, which is the Aeolian, and the 2 and the 3 are the Dorian and the Phrygian. All right, so let's copy this down. I should be able to do the relative positions. Now, you would think I would do Dorian first. I'm going to have to reorder this whole thing because I want to put it in order of 1 through 7. But I'm going to put first, I'm going to do it with the majors on top and then the minors, and then I'll reorder it. Okay, so we'll paste this down here, and then I'm gonna make this as related to the Ionian. So if the Ionian is the 4, and I need to go up to the Aeolian, which is gonna be an A, which is a 1. So I have to go around the horn. So it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then 1. So it should be 7 away, I believe. So it's going to be equal to, this 4 is going to be equal to this plus 7. Wait a sec. No, that's not right. 7. 9. So it's going to be 9, but that's going to take us to 13, and 13 minus 12 is 1. So I'm going to do this formula again. I'm going to go in here and say I need a 1 there. So I'm going to say it's going to be plus 9 minus 12, but I want to do the if logic. If tab, copying this, if that plus that is less than 13, meaning 0 to 12 or 1 to 12, then do that, but, comma, if not, do that minus 12. Close it up. Boom. That brings us to the 1. The Aeolian is going to be the A. And then this is just going to be equal to, I'll just pick it up over here, the Aeolian. Picking that up, but bam, I should do that with an X lookup, but that's fine. So it's an Aeolian. Okay, let's see if everything else populates the way we would kind of think it would. Now, so here, obviously, this isn't going to be right because I have to kind of just type this in at this point. So this is going to be, I could say, I need to say it's going to be picking up that A, and then it's going to make it a minor. So let's copy this down. By the way, this, I'm going to have to fix my formulas so that the G will always show up. So, but anyway, let's think about this. So it's going to be that, and then I have to say it's going to be minor. It's going to be a minor, so it's an A minor. And then let's F4 this thing, F4, and then copy it down. So it's going to be an A, so then this is going to be an A minor with a 7. So it's going to be an A minor, and I'm going to say, let's put in here, it's going to be an A minor in the quotes 7. And this is going to be an A minor in the quotes 9. And this is going to be an A minor in the quotes 11. And then this is going to be an A minor in the quotes, but it's going to be a flat 13. A flat 13, is that right? And so that's the one that would be funny because the 6, because the 13 is equivalent to the 6, and the 13 is equivalent to the 6, right? And so it's a flat 6, right? That makes sense. Okay, I think that's right. So let's make this yellow, and then I'm going to get rid of the absolutes. Now that the absolutes have served their purpose, when I copy them down, I don't want them there. So I'm going to say F4 on the keyboard, removing the dollar signs, enter. F4 on the keyboard, removing the dollar signs here, F4 on the keyboard, removing the dollar signs, and then here, F4 on the keyboard to remove them, and then here again. Okay, so there's going to be that. Okay, so the standard idea for the Aeolian, if I just look at a triad, what are the different ways? Now, I could call it an A minor. The problem with the A minor, though, is that it doesn't tell me if it's a triad that's being built off of the Dorian or if it's being built off of the Phrygian or the Aeolian. Now, the A tells you that, but I'd rather see it by basically relative position, by modal position. So it would actually be better to say, hey, look, I'm in the collection of notes around the C major, meaning I derived the 7-note collection from the perspective of the major or C major. You could derive it from the A minor as well if you use the A minor formula, but I think it's easier to say it's the collection of notes from the major perspective, the C major, and we're building off the Aeolian. So it's an Aeolian, it's a 3-note Aeolian chord. Or you can call it a 2-note A, for the A note, 2 modal whole steps, meaning it takes you 2 modal whole steps to get to the end point, which would be 2 times 2 or 4 modal half steps. So if I start on the A, then it's going to be 4 up. So it's going to be A is 1 plus 4 gives you 5. You're going to end on the one, it's on the 6 plus 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 minus 7 is 3. We'll talk about that in a second. But you could just call it a 3-note Aeolian chord, meaning just start on the A on the 6 and take every other note, 6, 7, and then 1, and then 1, 2, 3 to give you the 3 nodes that you'd be on. You could call it an A2. Now, removing the A, meaning the A note is redundant. If I already know the collection of notes, I just wanted to show that it's an Aeolian 2 modal whole step chord. And I could name it a capital A2, meaning if I say the collection of notes is the collection of notes around C major, but the Aeolian is the root, which is kind of what you need to do in Nashville number system, right? Everything has the same numbers. So you have to tell the people which of the notes is the tonic if it's not the Ionian. So you can do that by just saying, I'm just going to make it capital. So the capital A2 doesn't mean it's an A note 2. It means it's the Aeolian is the root, and it's 2 modal whole steps up. I'm not going to put any notes in my sheet music. I'm just putting relative positions. So that could be a useful tool to tell people. All you need to tell people is the collection of notes, and then indicate the tonic with a capital modal point. You could also do it by range, meaning it's going to be a 6-3 modal range, meaning if I start on the Aeolian, it's 6 and it ends at the 3. You just take every other modal half step. So it's a 6-3 modal range chord. You could call it an AP modal range chord, meaning it's going from Aeolian to Phrygian modal range chord. Now, if you add all 7, the most complicated one, then it would be an Aeolian A6 chord, 6 modal half steps to get to the end, or 6 times 2 is 12. 6 modal whole steps. 6 times 2 is 12 modal half steps. You can call it a 7-note Aeolian chord, meaning you just take the 6 Nashville number system and then every other note until you get 7 notes, which is the whole scale. And you could call it an A6, which is just Aeolian 6 modal whole steps up. You could call it a capital Aeolian 6 if it's the tonic, possibly, because I don't have any A notes in my references. I'm just doing relative points. You could call it a 6-4 modal range chord, meaning if you start on the 6 and you take every other modal half step or every modal whole step, you're going to end on the 4. That means it's going to be an Aeolian to a Lydian chord, meaning you're starting on the Aeolian, and if you take every other note, you end off on the Lydian. So if we look at the note half steps, these are the distances. So if it's 0 modal half steps up, it's going to be the first scale degree, which is going to be 0 notes up. If it's 2 modal half steps up, it's the third scale degree, which is 3 notes up. If it's 4 modal half steps up, it's the 5th scale degree, which is the 7th. If it's the 6th modal half step up, then it's the 7th scale degree, which is 10 notes up. If it's 8 modal half steps up, then it's the 9th scale degree, which is 2 modal half steps up. I'm sorry, 2 notes up if you think of the local distance, or 2 plus 12, 14 notes up if it's the octave up. And then if you say it's going to be 10 modal half steps up or 11 scale degree, then that means it's going to be 5 notes up, or you could say 5 plus 12 to get the total notes for an octave. And then if it's 13 modal half steps up, which has a local distance of 13 divided by 2, or 13 scale degree would be 12 modal half steps up. It's going to be 8 notes up, and you could say 8 plus 12. All right. So the distances then for our normal system would be scale degrees a perfect first, and then a 3 note away minor third, and then a 7 note away perfect fifth, a 10 note away minor 7, a 2 note away major second, and again you could add an octave up, meaning it's 14 notes away major second or major 9, right? And then you have a 5 note away perfect fourth, which you might say 5 plus 12 note away perfect 11, and then an 8 note away minor 6, which you might say is an 8 note away plus 12 minor 13. If you look at distance, modal distance, which is a little bit more logical, it would be a 0 note away from the Aeolian node, 0 modal half step, 3 note away from the Aeolian node, second modal half step, which would be the 3rd scale degree, 7 note away from the Aeolian node, 4th modal half step, which would be the 5th scale degree, 10 note away from the Aeolian node, 6th modal half step, which would be the 7th scale degree, 2 note away from the Aeolian node, 8th modal half step, which would be the 9th scale degree, 5 note away from the Aeolian node, 10th modal half step, which would be the 11th scale degree, and then an 8 note away from the Aeolian node, 12th modal half step, which would be the 13th scale degree. These would be the notes, which should change automatically now once I change the name here. So I can change this to any note I want of the 12, and it should give me the relative positions, or I can simply change this one to give me the 7-note collection from the perspective of the Ionian, and these should all populate to give me the relative Aeolian to whatever collection of notes that we're looking at. So let's also add this last bit and say, well, which bucket are these going to go in? You would think these would all fit nicely into the Aeolian bucket, right? So if I copy and paste my buckets, so now all of these are not in the dominant 7. They should be over here in the, I'm going to cut and paste them here, and cut and paste them here, except that this, I'm messing with my worksheet. This one right here has a thing we had to do to it, right? I had to do a flat 13 because the 13 is equivalent to the 6, and we have a minor. Now you would think the minor would already say it should be a flat, right? But kind of like what happens is the minor is applied to the scale degrees below 7, basically, right? And so when you get to the 9, 11, and 13, we still kind of assume it's major. So that means that we had to flat that one, which means I'm going to put it over here in the chord types that need an extension, even though we're not adding a chord that's in the ocean, something that I don't believe should happen if you had an efficient chord naming system, as would be the case with a modal naming system, which is what we are advocating here. Let's go back on over. And so up here, I want to change these because I need this to pull the G from here so that when I change this number, these will change automatically. So for example, this one is pulling up top. So let's change this. This is going to be, I'm going to say equal to this, and then I'm going to say and 7. And this is going to be equal to this and 9. And this is going to be equal to this and 11. I don't need quotes around the 11 because it's a number, even though it's kind of a text. Equals this and 13. Did I do that up here too? I need to do it here too. This needs to be, that's right. That's right. I just got out of whack on that last one. Okay, so now that I have this, I'm going to copy this whole thing down from the Aeolian and do the Dorian. So this is the 6, the Aeolian from a relative position is the Aeolian is a 6. Now we're going to go back up to the 2. Why? Because the Aeolian we think of as the main minor. So we want to compare the other minor chord constructions to the Aeolian. So I'm going to copy this whole thing, paste it here, and so this needs to be the Dorian. So this is going to be equal to a Dorian. I adore the Dorian. The Dorian is adorable. So we're going to say it's going to be 4. It's going to say it's this 4, and I got to go to a 6. So it's going to be the 4 plus 2 because it's D Dorian. So 4 plus 2, but I need to do the if function in case it goes over 12. So if tab, copy this thing, and then comma that. So if that is less than 13, then do that. But if not, comma, do that, and then subtract 12. Boom. So that gives you the 6, MUI B to the N. All right, and then, okay, let's look at these first over here. So now we have the D minor, the D minor 7, the D minor, and this all works. The thing that's funny is the Dorian actually works out better. Why? Because the Dorian happens to have a major 6 or major 13, which actually ties into our convention. So the Dorian, you would think the minor would be the one that you didn't have to do anything weird to, but it's actually the Dorian that you don't have to do anything weird to from a chord naming convention under the normal system, which again is kind of weird. So I think everything's pulling over correctly. So if you have the Dorian, you could call it the Dorian happens to be the D. The D is not always Dorian, but if it's a D note Dorian, then we can call it a D minor. And then you could say it's a D minor 7 to add the 7 scale degree, a D minor 9, a D minor 11, D minor 13. It actually fits in the boxes beautifully, even better than the Aeolian. But you still have a D, and I'd rather not name it by the note name because I want to transpose the whole thing. So if we go over here, we could say it's a Dorian. You still could add the D for it being redundant, and then it's a 2 modal whole step chord, meaning I'm giving you the point of Dorian, and then it's 2 modal whole steps up. I'd rather get rid of that D because it's redundant, because I already know I'm in the collection of notes around the C major. If that is the case, I can just call it a D2 modal whole step chord, a D2 chord, right? Or you can make it a capital D, not to represent the note D, but to represent the relative position, because possibly you want to be playing the D as the tonic. So in this case, you're going to say, look, I'm playing in the collection of notes around the C major. I'm not adding any note names in my naming convention. When I write the music, I'm just adding relative positions. And if I put a capital in the chord, that means that it's the root. So that from a Nashville number system, you're like, okay, I'm playing the collection of notes around the major collection, but the tonic is the Dorian node. So I'm basically playing in Dorian, which I can indicate without telling you that by just simply indicating in the chord name a capital D instead of a small d. You could call it a 3 note away Dorian, just meaning you just pick every other note from the Dorian, or you can name it by point, meaning you're going to say if I start on the 2, which is the Dorian from a Nashville number system, the end point that you get to is going to be a 6. It's going to be a 2-6 modal range chord. Or a Dorian, if you take every other modal half step, every other note in the collection of notes, you will end at the Aeolian. So I could tell you the end points, and you just take every other note as you go around the block to that end point. If you look at the full 7 note chord, the most complex chord, you could call that a D, a Dorian, a DD6 chord, which would be a Dorian D note 6 modal whole step chord. I'd rather just call it a D6 chord or a D6 modal whole step chord, which means the end point from the Dorian node will be 12 modal half steps up, which you can trim down to having a local distance by bringing it below 7. 13 scale degree, by the way, which would be, anyways, so it's, you can call it a 7 note away from the Dorian node chords. You can call it a capital D6 if it's the root. You could say it's a 2-7 modal range chord, meaning if you start on the 2 and you take every other modal half step, which is the definition of each modal whole step, you'll end at node number 7, which is the Locrian node. So I could call it a 2-7 chord, which would be a Dorian Locrian chord, meaning you start on the Dorian, you take every other note until you get to the Locrian in the 7-note collection, then you can call it that. So the note half steps, so we're going to have then, if you're at a 0 modal half step away, which would be the first scale degree, notes away would be 0. If you go 2 modal half steps up, which would be the 3rd scale degree, you have a 3rd. That's the minor 3rd. If you have 4 modal half steps up, which would be the 5th scale degree, it's 7 notes away. 6 modal half steps up, which would be the 7th scale degree, that's the 10. It's going to be that minor 7. If you have the 8 modal half steps up, or the 9th scale degree, the local distance is 2. 2 plus 12, though, would give you 14 if you take into account the octaves. If you go 10 modal half steps up, which would be the 11th scale degree, it would be 5 at the local distance from a note perspective, or taking into account the octave, 5 plus 12. If you go 12 modal half steps up, which would be the 13th scale degree, then the local distance would be 9, or 9 plus 12. Gives us the intervals. Conventional interval naming would be a 0 note away perfect first, 3 note away minor 3rd, 7 note away perfect 5th, 10 note away minor 7, 2 note away major 2nd. Notice we still have a major 2nd even though we're in the minor mode. That's the case until we get to the Phrygian, which is crazy. We got the 5, not as crazy as Locrian, no. Locrian 2 is also crazy. 5 note away perfect 4th and a 9 note away major 6, noting that this major 2nd, perfect 4th, and major 6 could be major 9, perfect 11, major, and then major 13. The modal distances are 0 note away from the Dorian 0 modal half step, 3 note away from the Dorian 2nd modal half step, which would be the 3rd scale degree, 7 note away from the Dorian 4 modal half steps, which would be the 5th scale degree, 10 note away from the Dorian, 6 modal half steps, which would be the 7th scale degree, 2 note away from the Dorian, 8 modal half steps, which would be the 9th scale degree, 10 note away from the Dorian, 10th modal half step, which would be the 11th scale degree, 9 note away from the Dorian, which would be 11 modal half steps, 12 modal half steps, which would be the 13th scale degree. Here's the notes from the perspective of the D, which would change automatically if I change any of the starting points, which means we can transpose it through all 12 collections of 7 notes. What about the buckets? This one actually fits more cleanly, cutting and pasting this one into the minor bucket without any need for extension than the minor mode, strangely enough. There we go. So there's that one. Let's do the next one. Let's go to the next one, Ultra Vase Phrygian, the last minor mode. It's more minor than the main minor. It goes crazy. Phrygian's like Dorian's lame. Dorian's weak. Dorian added a major interval with that 9, with that major 9. That's not how Phrygian don't play that. Phrygian's like, I'm all minor and I'm gonna level up on the Aeolian by adding a minor 2nd. So it's even heavier with that minor 2nd in there. So it's more minor than the main minor, more minor than the Aeolian, more minor than the minor scale itself. That's what Phrygian's saying. That's why it's like heavy, rocky stuff. All right, so it's gonna be note number 9 we need to get to. So it's gonna be the 4 up here, plus 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which is 5 notes away. So we're gonna say plus 5. Gets us the 9, which is an F. Let's go into it though, because I had to do the if-then function. If this bit is less than 13, then comma, do that. But if not, comma, do that minus 12. And then close that bad doggy up. There we still gives us the 9. All right. So then on this one, we're going to say, okay, so this one gives us an F minor. So it's still a Phrygian minor, which in this case is an F. So the F minor works, but it doesn't tell us if it's Phrygian or Dorian. It doesn't tell us the mode that we're on, but whatever, it still works. F minor 7, that works. But then it doesn't work on the 9. Why? Because the 9 is equivalent to the 2, and the 2 is where it has the more minor than the main minor, minor second, one note away minor second. So this is going to mess us up all the way down from here. So I have to say it's going to be a flat 9 of some kind. I'm just going to use a normal B. And then I'm going to go into here and say, now this is the 11. The 11 still works because the 4 is the same, because those are the perfect 4, which is equivalent to the 11. But you also have to say that you would have added a normal 9, but no, it's a flat 9. So you have to then say, even though you would have skipped to a normal 9 here, you have to flatten it. So I have to put that at the end. And then here we're going to say this would have been the 13, but you have to have a flat 9, and the 13, I should have just said flat 13. Can't I just say it would be a flat 13, because the 13 is equivalent to the 6, which would be the 6. The 13 is equivalent to the 6, and we have a minor 6 again. So you'd have to say, because that's more like the Aeolian. So I think you could just say minor flat 13 and then add to it a flat 9 after it. Or you can say a minor 13 and then flat 9 and flat 13. I think either worked, but the point is, this is a mess. This is ugly. You shouldn't have to do that if you're talking about notes that are in the same collection, okay? Okay? I mean, look, I would rather say, like, if we just call it a Phrygian chord, you could just say that it's a 3-note Phrygian chord, or you could say it's a Phrygian F2 modal whole step chord if you want to add the F, but you don't need to add the F because you already know that you're in the 7-note collection around the key of C, and you could just then call it a Phrygian 2 modal whole step chord, which gives you the point of the Phrygian and the distance to get to the end point, which is 2 modal whole steps up or 4 modal half steps up. That would be more specific. And if you want to make it the root, then you could just tell people from a Nashville number system, we're in the collection of notes around the key of C, but the tonic is the Phrygian, which I don't have to actually tell you because I'm just going to capitalize the chord of the Phrygian to indicate that's the tonic, because there's no notes in here. It's all relative position so that we can move it from the collection of notes to the key of C to all other 12 collections of notes if we wanted to. You could also call it a 3-note Phrygian chord if you wanted to. You just start on the Phrygian and you just add every other note until you get 3 of them. Or you can name it by endpoint, which would be a 3-7 modal range chord, meaning if you start on the 3 and you add every other note in the collection of 7, you get to 7 at the end, which would be the same as saying it's a PN or a Phrygian Locrian modal range chord, meaning you'd start at the Phrygian and you end at the Locrian, and you pick up every other one around the block as you go around the block. All right. And now if we had a 7-note chord, then it would be a Phrygian F6 modal whole step chord, or just a Phrygian 6 modal whole step chord. That's the distance to get to the last note. You could call it a 7-note Phrygian chord. You could call it a capital Phrygian 6 modal whole step if it's the tonic. It would have a range of a 3-1 modal chord, because you could just say, hey, look, just start on the 3, take every other note until you get to the 1, not every other note, but every other modal note, right? Every other note in the collection of notes as you go around the block, which would be the same as saying start at the Phrygian and you'll end at the Ionian. It's a Phrygian Ionian chord, meaning start at the Phrygian, take every other note in the collection of notes until you get to the Ionian, which will mean that you have all of the notes in this order, though: PX, Phrygian, Mixolydian, Locrian, Dorian, Lydian, Aeolian, and Ionian. All right, so what are the modal half steps and whatnot? So the note half steps, if you go 0 modal half steps up, which was 1 scale degree, it would be 0 notes up. If you go 2 modal half steps up, which would be 2 third scale degree, it would be 3 notes up, which is the minor third. If you go 4 modal half steps up, which would be the 5th scale degree, it would be 7 notes, would be the perfect 5th. If you go 6 modal half steps up, which would be 7 scale degrees, it would be a 10 note away, which would be the minor 7. If you go 8 modal half steps up, which would be 9 scale degrees, it would be 1 note up, or 1 plus 12, 13 notes up. If you go 10 modal whole half steps up, or 11 scale degree, it would be 5 notes up, or 5 plus 12 notes up. If you go 12 modal half steps up, or 13 scale degree, it would be 8 notes up, or 8 plus 12. The normal scale degree intervals would be a perfect first for the Phrygian. It has a 3 note away minor third, which is what we would expect because it's a minor mode. 7 note away perfect fifth. That's normal. It has a 10 note away minor 7, which is normal, but it has a 1 note away major second, or we could say 12 plus 1 would be a minor second, or minor 9. So it would be a 5, and that's the weird one. That's the weird one. That's the one that's different. That's the one that makes it more minor than the main minor. So then we have a 5 note away perfect fourth, or you can say 5 plus 12 note away perfect 11. And then you have an 8 note away minor 6, which you could call an 8 plus 12 note away minor 13, right? The modal distances then are going to be a 0 note away from the Phrygian node, 0 modal half step, 3 note away from the Phrygian node, second modal half step, which would be the 3rd scale degree, 7 note away from the Phrygian node, 4th modal half step, which would be the 5th scale degree, 10 note away from the Phrygian node, 6 modal half step, which would be the 7th scale degree, 1 note away from the Phrygian node, 8th modal half step, which would be the 9th scale degree. That 1 could be 1 or 1 plus 12. 5 note away from the Phrygian node, 10 modal half step, which would be the 11th scale degree. The 5 could be 5 or 5 plus 12. 8 note away from the Phrygian node, 12 modal half step, which would be the 13th scale degree. The 8 could be 8 plus 12. And then we have our note distances as well, remembering that the note distances will change as we change the notes that can easily be shifted to our 12 relative positions. Now this gets messed up. These 3 get messed up. We need extensions. I'm going to put these over here into this bucket, and it's like Phrygian gets all messed up because of that. It's again, that's ugly. This is ugly naming convention. This is shoehorned into place. We didn't have all of the tools in the toolbox when we sat down to do the work, and you made the thing ugly because of it. And someone needs to fix this, because that's not the best way to do it. So let's go back on over here and let's do this. Let's go to the Locrian. Now we're going to do the Locrian, which is like a minor mode, but then it went flat 5. It went crazy flat 5. No one goes flat 5. That's why he got kicked out of the minor club. So we go here. We're going to say this is going to be the Locrian, and we're going to say this will be Locrian. Okay, and then Locrian is a B, so that's going to be a 3, so it's going to be 4 plus 11? 11, no, yeah, minus 12 would be 3, is that right? 4 plus 11 minus 12 would be 3, right. So let me get rid of that 12, so I get that, but then I'm going to do my if logic, double clicking, and say if tab this plus this copy is less than 13, then do that. But if not, comma, do that minus 12, close it up, boom. Gives us our 3. All right, so with the Locrian, we have then, so now you've got, it's not a B minor anymore. We have to fix this and say now it's going to be, they made up a new thing, and they call it a B diminished. I'm not going to get into the logic on this again because it gets wacky, but basically it gets messed up when you add the 7 in a similar way as the Mixolydian gets messed up when you add the 7, right? So we had to then, I'm going to copy this symbol. They had to then do this to it. Let me copy this. So you have to copy the symbol. Type in, if you don't have this and you're doing this yourself, type it into ChatGTP. Say, give me the half diminished symbol, chat, and it'll give it to you, and then you could just copy and paste it without having to look it up in the symbol thing. But it's going to be that, and then it's going to be in here, we're going to call it half diminished, which looks like that. So now it's going to be, this is the easiest way to do it. You could do this multiple ways. again, the Locrian completely falls apart under our normal naming convention because, you know, they shoehorned in everything they could, and then they got to the Locrian. They're like, okay, they just gave up, it looks to me like, and they're like, okay, we're just going to basically call it a Locrian. We're just going to give it a Locrian symbol here for the half diminished. That's what it looks like. So you might as well just call it a Locrian chord, it seems to me. But they're going to keep trying. They're not going to give up. And they're going to make up this whole thing with the half diminished thing. So that's basically the normal thing. So if you had a Locrian, so again, it would be easy if you just call it a Locrian chord. You just say, well, it's going to be a Locrian B2 modal whole step chord. If you want to be redundant and name the letter, better to just call it a 2 modal whole step chord, meaning you start on the Locrian and you go 2 modal whole steps up, which would be 4 modal half steps up in the same fashion as you would before. It's just that the distances are a little weird when you get to the 5th, but the same logic applies. You just start from the Locrian and you count up just like you always do. If the Locrian happens to be the tonic, which it typically is not because most people don't write songs in the Locrian key, although knowing the Locrian mode is important to build chords so that you can put them in your songs. It's not usually the tonic, but if it were, you can capitalize the N for an N2 chord. You could call it a 3-note Locrian chord, just to name that it's 3 notes. You could name it by range, which would be a 7/4 modal chord, modal range chord, meaning if you start on the 7, take every other modal half step or every modal whole step, you will end on the 4, which is a Locrian Lydian chord, meaning if you start on the Locrian and you did that, you'd end on the Lydian. All right, let's try to do this quickly because I won't do the 7. Let's just look at the intervals so that we can see the intervals. So the distances, if you go a 0 note away from the Locrian node, it's going to be 0. It's going to be, if you go 0 modal whole steps up, half steps up, it would be 1 scale degree, which would be 0 notes up. 2 modal half steps up, which would be the 3rd scale degree, is 3 notes away, meaning it's still a minor third. And if you go 4 modal half steps up, which would be the 5th scale degree, then it would be 6 notes up. That's the funny one. That's the flat 5. So if you go 6 modal half steps up, which would be the 7th scale degree, then that would be 10 notes up, which would be a minor 7, which is normal. If you go, for the minor modes at least, if you go 8 modal half steps up, which would be the 9th scale degree, it would be 1 note distance, or 1 plus 12, which is that minor 2nd distance. So again, that one's not like the Aeolian, but it is like the Phrygian. So it's more minor than the main minor. And then we have if you go 10 modal half steps up, which would be the 11th scale degree, it would be 5 notes up, or 5 plus 12. If you go 12 modal whole steps up, which would be the 13th scale degree, so it would be 8 notes up, or 8 plus 12. The intervals under the normal naming convention is a perfect first, a 0 note away minor third, a 6 note away flat or diminished 5th, a 10, which is the weird one, a 10 note away minor 7, which is like the minor modes, a 1 note away minor 2nd or minor 9, which is similar to the Phrygian, not like either the Aeolian, which is the major minor scale, or the Dorian. And then you have a 5 note away perfect 4th and a 8 note away minor 6, which is like the minor modes. All right, and then from a modal distance standpoint, you have a 0 note away from the Locrian node, 0th modal half step, which would be the 1st scaled degree. You have a 3 note away from the Locrian node, 2nd modal half step, which would be the 3rd scale degree. 6 note away from the Locrian node, 4th modal half step, which would be the 5th scale degree. That's the weird one. 6 note away from the Locrian node, 6th modal half step, which would be the 7th scale degree. 1 note away from the Locrian node, 8 modal half step, which would be the 9th scale degree. The 5 note away from the Locrian node, 10 modal half step, which would be the 11th scale degree. 8 note away from the Locrian node, 12 modal half step, which would be the 13th scale degree. Here are the notes. And then if we go on into our buckets on the right, what buckets do these fall into? Then these are going to be, we made up a whole nother thing. So we're going to say this is going to go into our diminished bucket. And then all the rest of them, we made up this other. No, wait, this is going to go into half diminished. And then this is going to go into, like, I'm missing a bucket. I'm missing a bucket. I'm going to insert a cell here. Right click and insert. And this is going to be just normal diminished. Diminished. And so then this is going to go into this bucket. All right. And then I'll say boom. Wait, format paint. Or let's do this all the way across. Get it format painted. And then I'll copy this bucket. Let's copy this whole bit. And put it here. 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 Okay. So there's all the buckets. Okay. So now let's see if we can put this in the proper order now, because now it's in order of the majors and then the minor, and then the minors and then the Locrian. That's not a bad order to put it in, actually. Maybe I'll leave it in that order. I don't know, because you have the Ionian, Lydian, Mixolydian, and then you have the comparison of the Ionian, Dorian, and the Phrygian. But from a number perspective, you're going from the 1, 4, 5, and then back to the 6 Aeolian to 3. That might be a nice way to see it, because you're actually comparing the major modes and the minor modes. Let's just keep it at that, because what I want to do before we end this thing off is to copy this. Now we'll make the condensed table. Let's make a skinny over here. I'm going to grab this skinny and put that over here. And then, so now we've got our tables over here. Let's copy this table and put that here. And then I'm just going to say this equals, not the Dorian, I'm just going to say this is the full table. So here's the full table. And if I grouped them into one table, what would we end up with? We're going to say the notes are still going to be 3 note chords to 7 note chords. And then oh, wait a sec. This needs to be moved up. Let's move this up. Cut. And move it up here. Paste. Okay. So then the major chords are just going to be, I'll keep these, the C major. Now, generically speaking, I shouldn't have a C, right? It would be all of the majors. So how can I remove the C, I wonder? Let me think about this for a second. But because it could be a C major or it could be an F major. So I just want a generic major. Okay, I think I have a formula to do this, to do what we need to do here. Let's see if I can tighten this up a bit. See if we can tighten this up. Does that get any tighter? Not really. That doesn't do anything. Let's tighten this up a bit. Okay, so let's say I go into this and I can say, okay, I want to take the right of that, comma, and then len tab of that, brackets, -1, meaning don't include that first one. So take the whole thing, but from the right, but subtract the last bit. That's what that means. Close it up. And then it just gives me major. So then if I copy that down, then that's what we want. Beautiful. All right, let's do this over here. The minors are in essence going to be like the minor mode. It's going to be kind of like the minor mode, but it's actually closer to the Dorian. See the Dorian. So if I copy that down and I want to get rid of the D. So I'm going to say same thing. I'm just going to do that. But then I'm going to be like, do the right tab of that. But I'll copy it this time. Let's copy that. Control C. And then comma. len of that same one, control paste, same thing, and then close it up. -1, don't include that first character, enter. So now it's just a minor, and then it goes minor 7 and all the way up. So you would think this is what you would do for like the Aeolian minor, and then the Dorian and the Phrygian would get messed up. But no, the Phrygian actually fits this pattern better. And then it's like, okay, what about the 7s? Well, on the 7s, that's the Mixolydian bit, where like the Mixolydian, this one fit into the minor or the major system, but as soon as I go to the 7, it gets messed up, right? So I have to do that. Now let's do the same thing. So I want to say that thing, and then I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to go do the right of that, and then comma, and then len tab of that thing, same thing, paste, close it up, -1 to don't get the letter, and boom. So I'm just gonna call them by letter. It's just a 7 chord, and then it's just a 9, just an 11, just a 13. These only apply to the Mixolydian after you add the 7, meaning the triad would still fall here. So, okay, what about the diminished one? Well, that's gonna happen in the Locrian, typically. If we're just looking at the ones that are actually in the modal system, that's gonna happen in the Locrian. So boom, that's the only time it happens, because after that it gets to the diminished one. So I'm gonna copy that again, do this again. So this is gonna be like right tab of that, comma, len tab of the same thing, close it up, -1, boom. Give me that. What about the half diminished? That's gonna be all of the diminished, kind of like the Mixolydian, but for the Locrian, I'm just going to use the half diminished sign. We just gave up and made up another thing like we did with the Mixolydian. It seems like that's what maybe someone might disagree with that, but seems like it's what happened to me. Like basically that's what happened. No, there's a reason. It's just, you just made something up and shoehorned it in there. It's what I feel like. And it's ugly. It shouldn't be. That's an ugly way to do it. It's not beautiful like Pythagoras would want it, like Pythagoras would do it. So then over here, this one, we had to put these extensions on. And the reason I'm adding these extensions, we could have more extensions than this, but I'm adding these extensions because these are the extensions that we need just to play the notes that are actually still in the same collection of 7 notes. Which again, you shouldn't really need. These are the ones that's like, you really shouldn't need any of this. I shouldn't need any of this. I shouldn't need this. I shouldn't need these if I just named them by node, right? So we're gonna say this is gonna be, then once again, I got messed up because I started to get upset that no one is doing anything about this. Look at this. No one cares, man. It's like no one cares, but oh, okay. Let's copy this down, and then we're gonna do this one. This one we need. This is where the Dorian. Oh no, this is where the Phrygian gets messed up. So the Phrygian gets messed up, and you have to do these things, and you have to do this whole thing. Why? I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to say, once again, this is going to be right tab of that, comma, len tab, same thing, close it up, -1, boom. And there we have it. So there's our shorthand table for like the normal things. Again, these are all, you could have more complex chords because you could imagine chords that are choosing notes that are in the ocean, right? That's going to mess things up. That's when you would expect like this kind of stuff to happen. If you added a chord and then you added something in the chord that's outside the 7-note collection. But this is what you need just to do all the chords that are built within the 7-note collection without taking anything that is outside that collection, which again is, and it doesn't tell you where you're starting from. It doesn't. So again, this table is so much more confusing than even this table, if it's a lot, even though it's a lot longer, because it doesn't tell you when are you going to use these. In which point in the collection of notes am I going to use these on, right? And you have to then learn, well, it's going to be the 1, 3, 5 and the 2, 3, 6 is what you're going to use it on, but that only works for the triads of the major and minor, and the numbering system only works from the perspective of the major scale, because we're going to change the whole numbering system when you go from the perspective of any other position in the 7-note collection. Meaning, if you play in Dorian, Phrygian, Mixolydian, we're going to change the numbers. So then, right? Do you see how that's a no. Okay, we'll talk.